Welcome back to the channel, everyone. I'm Dee and this is Market Stalkers. Now today we're going to be a bit serious and we're going to talk about being a funded prop trader and dealing with a difficult loss in your life. And by that I don't really mean first world problems like slow internet or not being able to find your AirPods. I mean a real loss of something or someone who was a huge part of your everyday existence. All the videos out there on loss and grief while trading just deal with a loss from being a muppet and losing a bunch of money in the markets. And sure, that can be very difficult. However, the kind of grief and the feeling of loss that I'm talking about is the one where you lose a loved one, either a human or a pet, or even if you're going through a divorce or a difficult breakup. I've personally gone through this before where I messed things up royally after losing a very close young trader friend due to a very aggressive form of gastric cancer. And now I'm going through something quite possibly even worse than that. And that's the rather unexpected loss of my animal companion of over 14 years, this amazing rescue dog named Minton. And I say that this is probably worse this time because with my friend Jana, although we were super close, I wasn't walking her every day. I certainly wasn't making her dinner, nor was I snuggling in with her on the sofa in the evenings. So in a way, when we lose a pet, the guilt is worse because we are the ones who are responsible for them. They're like children who never grow up. So in light of my previous experience with Jana, this time around I decided to be a bit smarter about the grieving process and to just allow it to play out with all of its physical manifestations before I even attempt to go back to do any real trading. So I wanted to share my experience with grieving and trading for a living so that you can be slightly better equipped for that, inevitable moment when life slaps you right across your face and when the one who gave you the best memories becomes a memory. Grief and grieving is very physical. It's not just feeling sad and bawling your eyes out. Grief can actually lead to many health problems, but also memory issues. This is especially pronounced in the first few days after the loved one has died. You'll be numb, sad, irrational, and it can be very difficult to carry on even the basic activities like eating food or sleeping. This is why I really don't recommend carrying on trading when it first hits you, especially if consistent profitability is a relatively newfound skill for you. I've been trading for a long time now, and even I gave myself a full week before I even looked at any charts. And even now, it's literally 2 weeks after the loss, I still haven't done more than about 2 or 3 trades. And I'm certainly not ready to focus on, finding my usual 3 trades per day. I'm still having moments of huge sadness and just generally going through waves of missing him, not really sleeping through the night. And all of that can ultimately lead to tiredness, exhaustion, and ultimately bad trading decisions. And honestly, when you are feeling like that, the last thing you want to do is to add to your emotional burden by making bad financial decisions on top of it. And while it might seem like, it would be a good distraction, continuing to work or trade in a bid to sort of distract yourself from the pain, trading is the wrong kind of activity to be doing this. You'd be much better off doing something mundane, but something that will keep your mind off going down the rabbit hole of memories, which frankly hurt way too much at first. I managed to reorganize my entire closet. I keep doing the dishes and stuff like that. My husband went a step further and decided to rearrange the entire living area that he's been putting off for quite a while, and he decluttered everything. And that ended up freaking out our second dog, Lenny, who is also grieving, so now he won't eat without being hand-fed, and he's just generally being really super needy. So we're dealing with a grieving dog as well. But let's talk about some other physical manifestations of grief, what it really does to you. Generally, I don't really cry. I only cry when it's like a life or death situation. And since this is a death situation, I'm still breaking into tears quite a lot. As a result of that, all the crying causes dehydration. I'm not a huge water drinker anyways, I don't really like the taste of it, so it's quite an effort for me even to keep up with my normal sort of 1.2, 1.6 liters a day that I'm supposed to be drinking at normal times. So since this whole thing happened, I actually found myself getting quite dehydrated and my mouth and throat are just constantly parched for the majority of the day. I know it's stupid, but you know, it's just my mind is so distracted, it's not something I really think about. I've been trying to go to bed whenever I feel tired, and on some days that means about 9 p.m, which is super early for me, considering my, you know, regular bedtime is like 3 a.m. So I would fall asleep, and then a couple of hours later I would wake up in panic that I didn't feed both dogs. And you know, then it would take me like a full 5 minutes or maybe even longer before I wake up and remember why that is. And all of this is really not a good mindset for me to kind of get up the next day, sit at my trading desk, expecting that I'm going to make some like excellent trading decisions. Quite the opposite. Grief can also frequently cause chest tightness and difficulty breathing. That can lead to a high blood pressure. That's when it gets dangerous. On the first night when we put him down, I woke up gasping for air with like a really tight chest, and I started freaking out, and yet usually I have a very low blood pressure. So if my cardiovascular system was affected, I can totally believe when they say that people can and do die of a broken heart syndrome. Now we keep some bottles of portable oxygen around the house purely for an occasional oxygen boost, especially when I'm training for like a fitness competition or something. But let me tell you, that oxygen bottle really came in handy that first night. Grief also affects our memory. Now, our loved ones always continue to exist in our long-term memories, but there are many different kinds of memories: episodic, semantic, and implicit memory. All of them involve different pathways and brain systems. And when you lose someone who's very close to you, whether it's a person or an animal, all of these types of memories have to be updated. So you need time to relearn how to deal with the newfound existence without this individual. And because this new learning process is so emotional and so intense, many people will try to completely avoid facing the new reality. But in order to get over your grieving process, we need to be able to face it. Another reason why attempting to trade when your brain is like super busy rewiring itself to adapt to the loss is a bad idea, right? While you're grieving, not only do you find it difficult to connect the events that happened just prior to the death of a loved one, but this also carries on throughout the first stage of grief when you're basically in shock. I found it helpful to write things down, and that also included writing down stuff about him, what I would like to remember about him. And no matter how long you've been trading, grief will affect your memory one way or the other, and it will make you forget some of your usual processes. You may also experience a weight loss or a weight gain. Like with me, it was initially weight loss. While Minton was ill, while he was still alive, because I knew that it was the end, because we understood the implications of his kidney failure, my entire attention was on him and his needs, his eating, his medication. I lost over like 10 pounds in 2 weeks because I would forget to eat, or I would simply ignore the hunger. And then after he passed, it got worse for the first few days. But then a few days ago, I did start to occasionally feel hungry, and then I allowed myself to indulge in like all comfort foods. So for the last few days, I've been eating like a complete asshole. I've had donuts, pizza, bread, just basically carbs, which are my guilty pleasure. But you know, it's also because those things were some of his favorite foods. Unfortunately, I have problems with my blood sugar levels when I'm not on keto, not on ketogenic diet, which is why I have to stay keto for most of the year. But since Minton died, I just couldn't eat any keto foods because they're quite rich tasting. You know, usually I live on a diet of eggs, full fat cream, lots of leafy vegetables, but I also have fatty meats. I couldn't eat anything with a lot of flavor, so bland carbs, that was my choice. I started feeling worse and worse as the days went by, so now it's been over 2 weeks since he's been gone. I decided that I need to make an effort to, you know, start taking care of myself again. I've decided to put some tips on going back into ketosis on my Patreon channel. So I'll be putting up some cooking videos and recipes, as well as the ketosis protocol that I use whenever I'm getting back into it. Going from a glucose-based metabolism to a fat-based metabolism is generally quite a hard process on the body because you have to create all these enzymes that convert dietary fat to energy. I've been keto for over 4 years now, which means that I'm fully fat adapted, meaning my body knows how to use fat for fuel efficiently. But if you've never done keto and you're interested in trying it, that particular process takes a long time when you're first doing it. All the guidelines out there on the net say, oh, it's just 2 weeks. But 2 weeks is just to enter ketosis. Fat adaptation is something different. For me, initially, I think it actually took about 8 months. But anyways, going back to keto means that I have to make sure my electrolytes are in order because they go out of whack due to the diuretic effect of the ketogenic nutrition. So potassium, sodium, magnesium levels. If you have any problems with your blood pressure, anything to do with your cardiovascular system, just talk to your doctor before even attempting any change in your nutrition, okay? So if you want to check out my keto flip protocol, there's a link to my Patreon page down in the description box. Now that we know a little bit about all the physical stuff that can happen to us while we grieve, here's some things that I personally found helpful to try and adapt to this new situation. Walking outside. Now we're in another lockdown here in the UK, and to be honest, I really didn't feel like any exercise. And I usually work out 4 to 6 times a week. One thing that massively did help is having our second dog and trying to keep up with his routine as much as possible. So that was really, really good in the first few days because he had to go out walking. And I highly suggest to make an effort to go outside, go walking, preferably in a forest or anywhere with nature rather than like buildings and concrete. Another thing that I found incredibly helpful was to keep a physical presence of the loved one. So me and my husband built a whole shrine for him with all of his stuff. We bought like display cases and lights, and we're also working on some photos and a memory book. So it's helping me tremendously to deal with it. But you can also carry something that was the possession of your loved one that's much smaller, like a piece of jewelry. In my case, it would be like a dog tag with his name on it, and then you can keep it at all times with you. It really, really helps. I already mentioned trying to keep busy, doing something with your hands. Anything will do. I'm doing like dishes by hand, wiping down surfaces, and I don't clean. Housekeeping is not one of my priorities in life. But, beavering around, rearranging my wardrobe, cleaning stuff, it's just remarkably therapeutic. Finally, I would advise that you don't drink alcohol. I know that it's tempting to just try and drown your sorrows in the bottle, right? But alcohol is a depressant. It's going to make you feel even worse. I mean, 1 glass of wine is okay, but we all know it's rather difficult to stop at just 1 glass.
Or is that just me?
In conclusion, whatever you do, try to stay away from your trading desk while you're grieving, at least for those first few days, even the first few weeks if you need more time. And that's why I always say, have multiple sources of income. Inevitably, there will be a time when you're dealing with something heartbreaking. Having multiple sources of income where your life doesn't depend purely on day trading, it will give yourself and your brain some time to heal and adapt to the new situation. Don't ignore your pain either. Men, you're particularly prone to keeping your feelings inside. And I mean, I'm guilty of that as well because I'm not the most emotional person in the world, but that only prolongs the adaptation. A word of caution: if you're a few months down the line and you still have frequent feelings of remorse, guilt, loneliness, loss of meaning in your life, if you're still completely preoccupied with thoughts of your loved one, then you might be experiencing a case of complicated grief. And if that's the case, I really suggest seeking help from a grief counselor who can provide you with the tools to cope with the situation and possibly even some medication to help you move on. Because this means you haven't adapted at all and you're avoiding reality. But whatever you do, please don't take it out on your trading account, whether you're funded by a company or you're trading your own money. You will know when your mind starts to come back because you'll start having positive, happy thoughts about your loved one, instead of only ever focusing on their death. Then, and only then, will be the time to start looking at charts again. That's it for this video. Let me know down in the comments whether you've experienced grief while trading, how it affected you, and what you learned from it. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.